Hi guys, today we have something different. If you are a returning subscriber, you know that I mainly just cover reviews and rankings, but today I'm going to experiment with something new. We're going to talk about my favourite trap from every Saw movie, and then at the end I'll rank them from what I think is worst to best. This video probably won't contain too much footage of the traps I'm talking about. One, because it could risk being blocked because of copyright. Two, some of these get very gory and I'm not sure if YouTube would like it too much. And for the third final reason is I don't want to take away from these movies. I'd like you to see them in their full form in that film rather than just show you it here. But as I mentioned, if I do show something, it could be gory, so consider that a warning, and let's get into it. We're gonna start off with Saw, and the trap I've gone for from this movie is the reverse bear trap. Now, if you ask a Saw fan to name one trap, the first one that comes to 99% of people's minds is this trap. It's the most iconic trap of the whole franchise, and it is one of the first traps we get to see. I'm not sure if it's the first one, but it's definitely one of the first. And it also is the first time we get to see a look at Billy, the puppet, who becomes kind of like the face of this franchise. Now, for the trap itself, it's attached to the upper and lower jaw, and it is on a timer. Amanda, who is the victim in this case, has to cut open her cellmate, who she thinks is dead but actually isn't, and she has to get the key out of that and unlock the trap before it snaps closed on her head like a hippo eating a watermelon. The general concept of this trap is very simple but yet effective, a bit like this movie. It's straightforward, especially compared to what happens in the rest of the movies, but it executes its job well, and unfortunately we didn't get to see the effects of this trap as Amanda does escape, but we'll talk about that later. Now, from Saw 2, I'm going to go for the Venus flytrap. This is from the first scene of Saw 2, and it starts off the movie in a great way by getting right to the point. This trap is very similar to that reverse bear trap that I was just talking about, but instead of fitting onto someone's jaw, it fits around their face, kind of like a mask. You have one bit here and the other here, and once again it's on a timer. Instead of just snapping closed when that timer runs out, it also has needles, hundreds of them inside of the mask, so it will slam shut onto your face, which it eventually does here. Whereas in the first Saw with the reverse bear trap, Amanda had to get the key out of another person. Here, the key has been placed under the person's eye. By attempting to survive, he would have to take out his own eye, which he doesn't end up doing. But eventually the timer runs out and he gets the worst acupuncture of his life. And the way his head just drops to the floor with his eyes open, with the mask on, and the blood starts pouring out. It's a very creepy start to this movie. For Saw 3, I have gone for the rack trap. This is one of my favourites from the whole franchise. A man called Tim is strapped to a device which has his limbs spread out like he's doing the T-pose, and the trap slowly turns his limbs backwards, I guess. You know, the traps that I've talked about so far, the victim of that trap has either had to take something from someone else or take it from themselves. Here, to escape this trap, the person is obviously strapped down, so they have to rely on the slowest walking character ever, Jeff, to save him, which he ends up failing to do because he has no urgency. Tim accidentally killed Jeff's son, so essentially if Jeff was to get the key, he would have to take a shotgun shell to the body as sort of a sign of forgiveness. He avoids having to take that shell to his body, instead it took out some other random guy in the background, but he was too slow to help him out, and eventually Tim's limbs got, it's a bit of a rhyme, Tim's limbs got twisted around, and you could see blood, you could see bones cracking, poking out of his skin. It was a very gory trap, and one which I highly associate with this franchise. For Saw 4, I actually went for the ice block trap. This was the first time where I really had to think about the choice I was making, because the bedroom trap was another great addition to this franchise, so it was very hard to decide between the two, and maybe it's an unpopular opinion, but I went for the ice block trap. Yes, it has a lot less effort and creativity put into it, but just the practical work of it looked really good. Essentially, Detective Matthews was standing on top of an ice block whilst being strapped up and held in the air, whilst having a chain around his neck, so essentially that ice block is the only thing keeping him from being hanged. And he's praying that Rig doesn't come through the door before the timer stops, because if he does, which he does, 2 massive ice blocks swing down and absolutely obliterate his head. Just the practical stunt work for that looked really, really good. I don't know if I'll be able to show it on screen, but I know it's an unpopular opinion, and I can understand if people get annoyed that I didn't choose the bedroom trap, but I just couldn't not choose this one. For Saw 5, I actually went for the swinging blade trap. I don't actually know if that's the exact name, but it's the one from the opening scene of Saw 5. A character called Seth Baxter, I believe, was strapped down, lying down on it like it's a bed, but it's obviously strapped down where he can't get up. Like with most of these traps, he is on a timer. He has 60 seconds to put his fingers in the vices next to him so that they are crushed beyond use. Otherwise, a blade above him, which is swinging like a pendulum, slowly get lowered until it ends up cutting into his stomach. To be fair to Seth, he does crush his fingers, but as Jigsaw's apprentice wasn't following by the rules, Seth does get his insides chucked around the room as the swinging blade does cut into him. A lot of the appeal about the traps is obviously the violence, and that this trap did have it, but it also contained a lot of tension. As you can see, that blade swinging, getting lower, and just the noises it made added tension to the scene, as well as always the timer ticking down. But for me, this was quite an easy decision to come to for this movie. For Saw 6, I chose the hydrofluoric acid, and my god, this is one of the goriest kills in this entire franchise. Good old Roderick presses a button which swings down this massive board of needles which stab a character called William in the back, which ends up pressing him up against this fence. Now you're probably thinking, that sounds pretty straightforward, and yeah, it had quite a bit of force, but not that impressive. They weren't just needles. Those needles start to inject hydrofluoric acid into his body, which essentially melts him from the inside out, to the point where by the end of it, his bottom half of his body just looks like a massive pile of ketchup and ice cream. And as I said, this is one of the goriest kills in this franchise, and I definitely can't show this one because it literally has insides spewing out and half his body missing, but make sure to check it out somewhere on YouTube or watch the movie. For Saw 3D, for the second time on this list, I've gone for the reverse bear trap. It doesn't need explaining, I've obviously explained it in my Saw bit. Here, essentially, we just get to see the big payoff. We were introduced to it in Saw, and unfortunately Amanda escaped, and then I believe it was in Saw 6, Hoffman was put into the reverse bear trap, but then escaped as well. It was frustrating not to see what this trap can actually do to a person's face, and we finally get that payoff, and it was worth the wait here. What we see is this jaw and this jaw go separate ways, and the rest is history. For me, this was by far the best thing about this movie, as this is by far my least favourite in the Saw franchise, so at least we got that great moment from it. For Jigsaw, I went for the laser beam trap. Now, I was pretty disappointed with this movie, and to be honest, I was quite disappointed with the traps as well. A lot of them don't really stand out or feel very similar to what we've seen before, and it was disappointing because you would have expected maybe more creativity as it's a modern take on the franchise. And in concept, this one's kind of cool, but I just didn't feel the moment suited it, as it was the big reveal, which was very dumb in my opinion, and just the way this kill happened, it was very CGI, which goes against what we've seen in all these other movies. But essentially, Detective Halloran has this sort of collar which shoot up these laser beams, and to somebody's control, they can tilt those laser beams towards his face closer and closer, and eventually they all do cut his head open from different angles, which is cool. But then his head kind of flops open like a demogorgon, and the reason it looks dumb is because, according to this, he has no skull because there's no bone there, it's just flesh. So for me, although it's cool on paper, just the moment it was used in and the actual execution, it was kind of poor and disappointing for me, but it tops a lot of disappointing traps in this movie. And for the main event for Spiral, I chose the glass trap. This may be a controversial one because I've seen a lot of people saying how much they like the finger trap, I guess you call it. And I can understand that. It was a tough decision, but I really like this glass trap. As someone who has stepped on glass before in their life, I know the pain. To some extent, maybe not as much as this person. Glass bottles are dropped from high into a grinder which shoots glass at this person who is hung up and has no way of escaping unless Chris Rock helps him out. Just the relentless glass shooting at his body, cutting him open. It's gonna sound psychotic, but I enjoyed seeing that. I just liked how simple and straightforward it is, and it's unique. It feels very different to anything else we've seen in this franchise, so that's why it kind of stood out to me amongst the others in this movie. Yeah, overall it wasn't the most flashy of the franchise, but as I said, it stood out for me. So those were my favourite traps from each individual Saw movie. Now that we've talked about all of them, I'm going to rank them very quickly from worst to best. Now in 8th place, I went for that laser beam trap from Jigsaw. I just found it quite disappointing and the CGI didn't wow me. A huge increase in quality at 7th, I had the Venus Flytrap, as we end up seeing a better version of a similar trap later on. In 6th place, I went for that ice block trap from Saw 4. I like the practical work in it, but I just feel like there are a lot better ones here. 5th place, I went for the swinging blade trap from Saw 5, another one with great practical effects. I had a nice bit of tension to it compared to some of the others. 4th place, I went for that glass trap from Spiral. As I said, I've experienced treading on glass, so I know the feeling to some extent, and I liked how unique it was despite not being big and flashy like the others. Maybe controversial, but 3rd place, I went for the reverse bear trap from Saw and Saw 3D. Once again, a very cool trap and an iconic one which eventually had a satisfying end, but I just preferred some of the traps higher up in this list. 2nd place, I had the rack trap. I just love the way the limbs twisted and the practical effects once again as the bones popped out. I know I sound really weird for saying I like that kind of stuff, but for me in 1st place, the goriest of kills was the hydrofluoric acid trap from Saw 6. You know, some of these traps they've been shocking, but this one literally had my jaw dropped as I couldn't believe how gory it went and how much of it they were showing as well. They didn't cut away from it often. You literally got to see the full effects, and I thought the practical work for that as well was very well done. But anyways, those were my favourite traps from each Saw movie. Let me know what yours would be down below, and I hope you did enjoy this video. If you want to see a Saw ranking of all the movies, I'll leave a clickable card up in the corner here. But thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video.